All right, so for my project one for intercultural communications class, the project was to talk with someone with a different culture than you or different experience in their life and how that might have been difficult in different ways and things. My roommate, Christian, he grew up in a very different background than I did. I grew up just suburban Minneapolis, very just normal American culture, but Christian, he grew up in Worthington, Minnesota, of a very Spanish background. Both of his grandparents immigrated from Mexico, and his mom was born as like a first generation person in the US, and they had a lot of things different than us, and he had a lot of different things than us growing up. So for him, some of the main difficulties were, at first he didn't really realize it was difficult, right? He just thought it was normal. But at his house, he grew up speaking English, but his grandparents and his parents and his mom spoke Spanish, and he couldn't always necessarily communicate with them, but they wanted him to know English so then he could communicate with everyone else in the US and in his environment and stuff. And he'd play with like the neighborhood kids and stuff, and so he really never knew anything differently than that. But on the weekends he might just they had a lot of like family gatherings and stuff. They'd eat their ethnic food, just have different traditions and things like that with their family. For church, they would go to Spanish mass, and so a lot of people like in their town, there was people from Mexico and I think El Salvador and Guatemala, and they all kind of came together and had like a Spanish mass for Catholic mass. And so he would go to that, and just a lot of his environment growing up was all these people with very Latin descent. And so everyone around him had these different things, right? And that's how his family was too. But he didn't really understand the struggle or difference until he went to Catholic school. So someone from his church decided to be generous and pay for him to go to private school. And obviously private school, that's a little bit different than that type of background, because for them, since they were immigrants, he said they didn't necessarily have the most economic fortune either. They grew up in not the greatest neighborhood, and so there was a lot of things that he didn't get to experience from both having that cultural background, or not get to experience, but different from having that cultural background, but also that economic background as well. So then when he went to Catholic school, he noticed holy cow, it's actually kind of hard for me to communicate with these people about experiences, because their experiences are so much different than mine. His family, his grandpa had to do different odd jobs. His grandma worked I think at a retail store, and that was their main source of income, and all this different stuff. And then all these other people, they had just established families and different things that they would do that were different than him. And so he not necessarily felt left out, but it was hard for him to connect with those people. He always could get along with them just fine. There was never a problem with that, but just relating to them and having those shared experiences and having it be easy. And then so that was kind of him growing up. And then when he came to USF, things were different again, because he still grew up like that all throughout high school. But then also he when he came here, everybody at USF has a very similar background, I would say, just pretty strong in their Christian faith, and just I would say just a very American, I guess, suburban culture, maybe small town or whatever. Just everyone gets along, has pretty shared experiences overall. But he grew up and still, again, it was different, and so he didn't really talk about it ever. And eventually, so at first it was a little bit hard for him not to get used to, but just to have those shared experiences. So that was some things that were challenging for him, just the variation and how his culture was different growing up in his family. But overall, he's been able to adjust well, and he's not any different than us in terms of being a really strong, motivated individual. So